Thank you for inviting me. If the topic is how to succeed in a new country, I have some experience, and my family does too. My father immigrated from Hungary, my mother from Germany. I moved from the States to Canada in 1968, and then I moved to Hungary in 1990. If you can accept death, and you can accept failure, then you really have nothing to worry about, because we will all die. And most people are paralyzed. They don't become what they could be. They don't become as successful as they could be because of fear, and they're afraid of failure. Well, guess what? You will have some failure. In fact, I've had a fair amount myself. There are many motivational speakers who tell you how to be number one, how to win. Well, look, there are 7 billion people in the world, so the chances of being the best at anything are rather small. But you can live a better life. You can get more of what you want. I didn't join the Army, but I like the slogan of the American Army, be all you can be. And most of us are a little less. We all have handicaps. Some of us even have problems. Some of us have skeletons in our closets, things we don't want to put on a CV. I was looking back and I realized I've been arrested in 5 countries. I have a criminal conviction in Hungary for breaking and entering. I disputed with a man who didn't want to pay us rent. And I've been fired more than a few times. It's sort of boring to go into it all. I had a problem at lunchtime. I was always hungry, and then I get mean. My biology says I should kill somebody and eat them. Well, that's not good in a work situation. But successful people do not get stuck in the past. Really successful people generally have more failures than a failure. A failure fails once and says, that's it, I'm dead, I lost, I'm out, lost my money, lost my reputation, lost my job. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. The Hilton Hotel, started by Mr. Hilton, who had a string of failures before he thought of hotels. One of his was he sold terribly low quality clothing. He had only one customer who ever asked for repeats. And finally he said, gee, I'm happy you like our service. What exactly is your business? He said, I'm an undertaker. He only had to use the suits for an hour or 2. Edison had a lot of problems. President Lincoln in the States was a failed businessman. He was a failed politician. He lost the election to Douglas for Senate. He could have said, in his 50s, I'm a loser. I failed. I can't make it. But he didn't, because the game's not over until it's over. There are enough other people who will condemn you. You do not have to join the chorus and condemn yourself. You don't have to feel guilty and depressed, because everybody looks funny in our underwear. One of the big questions you have when you're trying to find out what to do with your life is, who are you? A lot of people really don't know. And the next question is, well, all right, you know who you are. What do you want? I teach at a university, and we have lots of young people, and I ask them, well, what are your hobbies? And they say, poetry and guitar playing. And I say, and how is it that you're studying wood engineering? Well, my father did. Great. You losing your hair too? No, your father's a different person. That's not a reason to study something. And there is a shortage in Hungary of vocational testing. Young people are so busy trying to do well in their secondary schools and pass exams, and somehow they get into a university, whichever one, doesn't seem to matter, and then they worry about exams. And I said, but is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? Oh, their faces don't always light up. If you're not excited about what you're doing, what the hell are you doing it for? It doesn't make any sense. I love my job. It took me 25 years to find it. Maybe I wasn't the smartest person in the world. Maybe I wasn't focused enough. But you don't have to waste your life feeling sad. When I arrived in Canada, the first thing I did was go to the House of Commons in Ottawa, and I thought, someday I will be here, if not the Prime Minister, at least an important member of Parliament. Then I went to Maclean's magazine, the biggest English language magazine in all of Canada. I had my typewriter with me. This is many years ago. I didn't realize that the justification for existence of Maclean's is they are not American. I showed up and said, howdy, I just got here from Boston. I didn't know that this was like a cat trying to join the dogs club. Then I went to the University of Toronto and I said, Good afternoon. I've had 3 hours a week experience as a teaching assistant in the political science department of the University of Rhode Island, and I'm looking for a professorship. Well, the young guy on the other side of the desk said, you know, it sounds like your background and my background are very similar. There is one difference. I'm on this side of the desk and you're not. All right, I could make up lots of rationalizations. The Canadian university system expanded 300% in 10 years. There was a shortage of smart old guys to be professors. Women weren't in the game so much then. So they brought in Americans and British people. And when I approached young Canadians and said, howdy, how do you do? I'd like to come in and have a good job. They said, oh no, not another American. We, native-born Canadians, we want the good jobs. Well, what kind of job could I get? My first one was pulling lumber out of a freight car. I've often thought about that. I thought, this has to be one of the dumbest, slowest things. And then I realized that my whole salary for the day was probably the price of one of the boards. So I'd walk in and out of this boxcar and pull these boards apart from this mess where they'd put them as a puzzle. And at the end of the day, I cost them the price of one board. So then I got another job, catching fish. This is the first time I actually lied, bald-faced lied, and said, yeah, sure, I worked at the Point Judith Fish Cooperative and I worked on the Bob and Berry. What I'd actually done at the Fish Cooperative was shovel fish and ice that came off fishing boats. But I thought, if I don't get a job, and I had to promise the Canadian government I wouldn't go on welfare, then they're going to deport me, and then they'll send me to Vietnam from the States. And I thought, I really need a job. So I got it. When I came back to Toronto, some of the letters I'd written had taken effect, and I was invited to an interview at the Holt, Reinhardt and Winston Publishing Company of Canada Limited. And they said, with your background of social science teaching and smart enough fellow, you can edit textbooks. So I thought, great. And I got to read books about geography and history, and my job was to find the little mistakes and to make sure if we said, picture of Indian is on page 37, that it was really on 37 and not somewhere else. And I stayed at the office late every day. The other people seemed anxious to go home, but my wife was still back in the States and I had nothing else to do, and I thought, I have to make a good impression. So I thought I was a perfect employee. There was one problem. I'm a global thinker. Details are not my specialty. So I would read a page of text, and great, great. Next page, wonderful, yeah, good writing. My job was to find the mistakes. So one day the boss, who was a British gentleman, called me in and said, you're just not making it. You know, the text looked full of holes, errors, mistakes. It's possible that they could possibly use you down the hall in sales. I was thunderstruck. No job, no status, no money, no wife. My wife was not going to move to Canada if I was unemployed. Now, he didn't say, we've discovered your real talents. We really want you in sales. He said, they might need you. Now, how would you react? All of your dreams just went poof. Fishing didn't look like a good opportunity, $75 for 16 hours a day. That was after 2 weeks, not 1 week. So I bought 24 bottles of beer and tried to drink them all. And my roommates decided that, well, they'd accept a few for me free. And then I did this day after day, and I thought, gee, that big severance check is disappearing fast. It's turning into urine, and I'm not going anywhere. And somebody had a book in the hippie commune called On the Road by Jack Kerouac. And I thought, that's it, I got to get out of here. So I did this with my thumb, and 3 days later I was in Vancouver. The cost of the trip, $12. I got a job digging and shoveling. I don't know if it was low technology or guys still do this today, but they put some strings on the ground and they said, we'll tell you how deep to go, just stay in between the strings. I felt like I was Ivan Denisovich or something in the Gulag. I mean, I couldn't believe how tired I was. And this is the prime of life, young, healthy. I hitchhiked back to Toronto and spent a horrible winter. I didn't realize that when I dropped my electric razor on the floor of a hotel in Vancouver and it broke, that I should have got it repaired. I had hair on my face. Well, picture yourself in 1968, 1969, What does hair on the face mean? Drugs, degeneracy, sex, rock and roll, all the things that employers and older people are terrified of. They hate this stuff. I don't know what caused me to do it, but I decided to be a security guard, and they said, that's got to go. So I cut off my beard. I got the security job. I got a nice apartment near the university. I met a wonderful, charming young lady who liked me very much. I got a job teaching secondary school in a little village school about 2 hours north of Toronto. I got back in the bourgeois world by just taking off this. Now, I know a young man who has his hair in a bag behind his head. And I said, you know, that could be a problem since you don't have a diploma and you don't have a positive work record. No, it's got nothing to do with it. Okay, if you know all the answers, you just go right ahead. Now, since I like traveling and I like meeting people, why didn't I go into sales? I was afraid. That's the long and short of it. Later, when I came to Hungary, the other teachers were complaining about, gee, you know, the salary's not so good. We have nice status, clean, dry work. It doesn't rain on us, but it's just not enough money. I decided to sell an encyclopedia that I had sold in Canada, and it was unknown in Hungary. And I thought, well, I don't speak Hungarian, actually almost hardly at all, but it's an English encyclopedia, so I'll just show it to people and say, you like? Here. Sign name, it yours. 2 years pay, no hurry, no problem. And I did rather well. So the company had a box, 200 boxes of encyclopedias, and I sold 126 of them. They said they hired several dozen other teachers, librarians, and they didn't sell all the rest. That's like one per person. But it isn't my goal to be a salesman. I had to spend years and years trying to find out, what do I want? Now, most of us think we want money. And there's a book by Herbert Marcuse called One-Dimensional Man. And it says in today's society, really that's the only value that people talk about. You know, can you make money from this? And coming from the States, it's even stronger there than it is here. To me, money is a bit like water. Now, my brother is very positive about it. One day he told me that his tax bill was equal to my total earnings from 3 jobs at the same time. And I went, wow. Of course, this is the brother who never ate his Easter rabbit at Easter time. He's the kid who sold his fresh orange at scout camp for 25 cents because he said on Monday, I'll have the 25 cents and that orange will be in the sewer system. So money is his goal, money's what he got. But it really wasn't that much of my goal. If you don't have water, very few of us have been in this situation, but you can imagine if you don't have any water, you're dying on the deserts, that's all you can think about. And finally, you might get a liter or 2, or let's see, I have one hidden away here, yes. Just in case I need it, it's here. But after you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 liters, you can't drink a swimming pool. And it's not a big motivator after that, not for me. So when I was a salesman in Canada, my boss used to say, well, you could win a trip to New Orleans, you could get an extra car, you could get more money. I said, but look, my wife's got a government job, we don't have any children, we have a sauna, a sailboat, we live on the water. Why would I need more money? So if you think you want money, if you think that's your main goal, then go for it. Go work in the money business. The easiest money I ever made was working for a life insurance company where a retired gentleman had to cash in his savings plan, and I had to witness that he was who he said he was, and that he had invested this money. And this poor guy probably worked really hard for it. I made $420 for 15 minutes of saying, hello, Mr. Smith, how are you? I'm your friendly agent, sign your name. Okay, show me your driver's license. Yes, that's you. So if you want money, go to the money business. But there are other things in life. I don't think anybody ever became a nurse. And very few people became an elementary teacher for the money. In Eastern Europe, people go into politics for the money because it seems to be there. But in Western countries, politicians don't earn so much compared to what they could make in other walks of life. There was that humorous video about Mitt Romney saying, I don't want that low-wage job of president. It's only $400,000 a year. Because people in the money business expect to make more, and they do make more. There was a funny story about a man who was driving, and his wife said, darling, don't you think we should look at the map? He said, I haven't got time. We're making great progress. And that often reminds me of my university students. They haven't got time to sit down and think about, do I want to be a wood engineer? We need wood engineers, and we have some. We also have probably one forestry engineer for every tree that's in Hungary. But they're so focused on daily small stuff, they never take time to step back and think, I may not make a living as a poet or a guitar player, but I really don't want to spend my whole life putting wood laminates together. Or maybe I do. The thing is to make up your mind. One day, I woke up on the floor of my friend's apartment in Vancouver. I had drunk a little bit the evening before and bedded down for the night on the living room floor. And as I opened my eyes, I could see a book on the bottom of his bookcase. Now, normally, I'm a pretty tall guy. I don't see the titles down on the bottom. There it was, How to Get What You Want. And I thought, you know, waking up on the floor with a headache, not having a job, is not really what I want. So I read the book, and by good fortune, the author came from Vancouver. Not all authors live in London or New York. And he agreed to talk to me, and he promptly died 3 months later, so I was glad I talked to him when I did. And the book is actually a little bit banal. I hope my remarks to you are not, but he said, what do you want? Get serious about it. And in what order? So I'd like an airplane and a sailboat and a UFO and a few other things, but the first thing I want today is lunch. And then after lunch, I have some other wants. So make a list of what you want. Then make a list of what are the obstacles. There's always an obstacle. I could not teach in a Canadian university because I was an immigrant, and I didn't have a doctorate, and I lived in a small town on the ocean. I found one obstacle after the other. You can find all the obstacles you want if you just look hard enough. You know, there's such a thing as driving with the brakes on. And that's what happens when you focus on all the reasons why you cannot do what you say you want to do. Now, the things you need to do, this book I said was a little banal and a little boring, is you have to be willing to take the intermediate steps. You know, getting off the bus from Boston and saying, I will be a member of the Canadian Parliament, is skipping a few intermediate steps. Going to the biggest magazine, when I had never even written for a village newspaper, was skipping the boring stuff on the way. Similarly, I thought, well, I can't really get into broadcasting because, well, maybe I could. So I went to see one of our most famous Canadian broadcasters. He agreed to see me on a Sunday morning at his home. As you know, it's really hard to get to see people who are in the public eye. Everyone wants to see them. That's why they have secretaries to tell you to get lost. But for whatever reason, he let me talk to him, and he said, well, look, Richard, did you ever think of taking a 2-year communications and broadcasting course? I thought, are you crazy? I'm 26 years old. In 2 years, I'll be 28. I'd love to be 28 now, but it seemed like the end of the world. How could I spend 2 years not making money? Guess what? I wasn't making money anyway. It wouldn't have been a loss. So I had my excuses, I had my rationalizations, but somehow I did manage to get jobs in very tiny radio stations in faraway places that have more bears than people, even on television. And since I didn't really know what I was doing, within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they usually said, John's going to do your job now. Thanks for coming. Goodbye. And this seemed to happen a lot. There was a station in Victoria that's 50,000 watts, as big as you can be in Canada. They didn't fire me once. They fired me twice. After the first time I was crushed, I went home, and then about 9 years later, the news director remembered me. I picked him up when he was hitchhiking. He said, yeah, you have a great voice. You've got a little more experience. Sure, you're on. And he found a better job, and the day he left, they told me I wasn't needed anymore. Well, we can take our sad stories and use them like a teddy bear to comfort ourselves. Almost everybody has a number of these stories. Shirley MacLaine tells the story that her father was denied the chance to be a university teacher, couldn't get his doctorate because of a cruel, sadistic, hateful woman professor who was supposed to help him with his doctorate. Years later, when she was going through his things after he died, she found this scribbled mess of foolscap papers. He hadn't even typed it. And yet, this was the reason he didn't make it. I used to teach a young lady who said she was going to be an opera singer. Well, I've studied some singing, and I know that she had a very average voice, at the best on a good day. And she wasn't doing a thing except attending the opera to get ready. I said, do you sing in old people's home? Are you taking music lessons? Do you sing in a church? You know, like, what are you doing to do the intermediate steps between the happy daydream, member of parliament, and the nobody? And she wasn't doing a thing. This was such an unpleasant conversation for her, and I have a mean streak behind all this smiling face. I said, look, reality is you have a teaching diploma with 0 experience and no work experience at all. She quit. That was the end of her business with me. But she took a job with a newspaper, she had writing ambitions, and this could be the start of something. My wife told me that she had a cruel teacher who didn't like her because her family was so poor, and her father was dead, and they weren't upper class, and so she couldn't go to music school in the nearest big city. And she had played the flute. So when we really couldn't afford it, somehow I managed to buy a used Armstrong flute. Well, not a note. She said it didn't work. So I took it to an expert. He said, it works now. I said, oh, it still doesn't work. I took it to another expert. He said, it works fine. The flute sat there. I ruined her story. You know, she had a great excuse why she wasn't a flautist or in the symphony or something. Do you think nobody else ever suffered unjustly? Do you think nobody else ever was treated badly by a policeman or a government official or the tax office? I mean, my father's house was stolen by the Hungarian communist government. You don't see me sitting around saying, oh God, if they only had stolen our house, you know, I wouldn't be lying here drunk. So many of us have had setbacks and misfortunes, and it's your choice. You can't make the wind blow different directions, but you can trim your sail. You can respond to it positively, look for plan B, or you can wallow and say, oh my God, oh, life's so awful. You know, we're having a financial crisis now. Some people would even call it a depression. The amazing thing is, when there's 25% unemployment, there's also 75% employment. There's a very familiar story called Acres of Diamonds. A man had a rocky farm in West Africa, and they couldn't make a living, and it just seemed hopeless, so he went to the city, and he had a humble job, and then a better job, and then he started a business, and then there was some government corruption, and they stole everything from him. He had no place to go, so he went back to the old family farm, and there they were with a swimming pool and big fancy cars and air conditioning, and he said, what the hell? Well, what happened? They said, well, you remember all those rocks? You remember how hopeless it was to grow anything? Yeah, well, that hasn't changed. Did you look at the rocks? Rock is a rock. Well, yeah, except these rocks have diamonds. So sometimes, no matter how bleak the place is that you're living, you can grow where you're planted. You can succeed where you are. If you decide to go, and most of you have, because that's how you got here today, it means giving up your circle of friends, everything that's familiar, sometimes your language, generally that's the case, and that can be pretty stressful. It may be that when you think about it seriously, you'll say, look, a stable social life, a warm supporting network of friends, that's what I really want. I don't want to be in Hollywood. Well then fine, stay where you are. But many of us go through life weekly whining about, I didn't get to be a member of parliament. You know, I'm not the editor of the biggest magazine. That's just awful. But we're talking about goals we don't really want. A very close friend challenged me on this when I told her that my radio career had collapsed in ruins when I went to work for the political party that doesn't support employers, but employees. I was considered poison. She said, you're not dead, you're only 37 years old, you know, give it one more go. So I took a credit card, flew 5,000 kilometers to Toronto, sat down and said, may I sit at the news desk? I'd like to read the news for you. And they said, well, okay. And I got to do it where all the famous people sit. Every night I got to sit there in the afternoon and read the news. And they said, okay, thanks a lot, bye-bye, don't call us, we'll call you. When I was back in the other side of Canada, I telephoned them every day and said, hello, it's Richard Van Fuchs. Have you got a news job for me yet? And finally, they got a call from a man up the coast from us, and he said, I need somebody for the summer. And they said, there's this lunatic in a village on the water who phones us every day, hire him! And it worked. I was there. When people give you advice that helps you, take it with a grain of salt. Because when I started selling in Hungary, people told me, do not go to the technical vocational schools. Those students are not smart enough to go to the academic schools, and therefore they don't learn a lot of English, they don't learn foreign languages, they learn practical things, they actually get jobs. It turned out the government, which was left-wing, had a special fund to help these kids. They thought the children of professors and dentists and business people don't need extra help. They're getting lots of help and money and support at home. The technical vocational schools were my best customers. Maybe they never opened the books. That's not my problem. My job was to sell them, and I sold them. They also told me, don't go to Eastern Hungary. Very sad place, 30% unemployment. Best thing they can hope to do is move to Western Hungary and maybe they get a job doing something. I visited 18 schools and libraries in the space of 6 hours. I was moving. Hello, hi, nice book. And at the end of the day, nobody had bought anything. But within a week, I got a telephone call, a fax, and then a letter. I had 3 orders, which was equivalent to all the money the university paid me for 1 month teaching. That was for 6 hours work. When Mr. Head went skiing, he said, oh, very nice, but you know, they are wood, and they've been making wooden skis since Viking times and earlier, probably. Could they be made in a better way? And the ski expert said, of course not. We have ash wood and we have other kinds of wood. Wood is how you make a ski. And Mr. Head said, well, there's plastic and steel, and he made head skis. So when you're outside and you ignore the experts, sometimes that's the way to go. On the other hand, you do not want to reinvent the wheel, because a lot of things, there's hardly a problem that you had or that I had in my life that somebody else has not already had and has solved. I remember a staff meeting where we thought, how can we organize the school day so there are 2 hours for a chemistry class? I went, what? We've had mass high schools for mass education since the 1870s. Did nobody else have a 2-hour chemistry class? Never mind, just sit down. You're the new guy. You don't know anything. People told me, don't go to small villages if you're selling books. I went to a logging camp owned by a logging company. All the houses were the same. They all looked the same. And everybody made a living chopping down trees or driving trucks and doing the related jobs. And it was cold. I don't have a lot of hair here. I had a little more then, but not so much. And I thought, well, I might as well finish. Only 3 more houses. I got to the house near the end, and the man said, where have you been? I phoned your office in the city twice. Well, of course, they weren't going to send anybody 7 hours from the city to see somebody in a logging camp. But I happened to be there. And I said, yeah, well, that's fine. And he also allowed me to tune his piano. So it was a very profitable visit. But the trick is, knock on every door. Don't say, well, these guys don't read. If they were academic, they wouldn't be loggers. Excuse, excuse, excuse. I just want to get warm and get out of this business. See everybody. And I did. When I was selling in Austria, I picked up a Yugoslav refugee, and he said, I'm 40 years old. How can I start all over again? I said, like me. I came to Hungary at 48. I'm 50 now. I started all over again, and things are working reasonably well. You might say, I just need a little money for my dream. I had a music magazine, and the printers wouldn't take promises or future revenues. They actually wanted cash. I walked down the street of the village. I saw a house that needed painting, and I said, hello, your house needs painting. And the man, yeah, I know, but I don't have any time. I said, gee, I have a lot of time. He said, what do you want? 200? Done. And there was the music for the money for the magazine. Other people say, I don't have the right qualifications. Well, I have 2 teaching certificates, bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. And whenever I apply for a job teaching in England, they say, oh, you don't have a Trinity language teaching certificate. I said, it's amazing. I've made a living for 25 years without any English teaching certificate at all. Jane Goodall, who studied chimpanzees. She was a nurse's aide or something in England, but she really liked animals. She wasn't a biologist. She wasn't a professor. She was just a hard-working, serious woman. You have to focus on, if you say, I want to get paid for doing this, do it. The lady who wanted to be a singer, she should have been singing, right? So you have to focus on result, not on process, not on obstacles. There's a funny story about the Marxist revolutionaries in Germany. They were going to a meeting with Lenin and Stalin in Stuttgart. They got out of the train and there was no ticket inspector to check that they had got out at the right place and paid enough for their tickets. They didn't go to the meeting. They spent the afternoon standing around the train platform. waiting for an inspector, because that's the procedure. They were totally focused on procedure. When I got old enough to get a senior discount on the Austrian railways, I left Hungary, went to the first Austrian village and said, "Hello, I want to have a senior discount." The guy said, "Hey, you're not Austrian. I hear that New York accent." I said, "That's true, but I've got the 27 euros. He thought about it, looked through his papers, and he said, "Ich kann kein Hindernis finden." I thought, why on earth are you looking for a hindrance? Why don't you take the money? Here's the money. Well, he finally did. I can promise you, you will fail, but you will probably survive until you die. You need to be an opportunist. There's probably a reason why I have 3 citizenships. You need to give people what they want. I always lose my temper with beggars because they just say, "Give me money." I said, "Yeah, well, what's for me? Are you going to wash my windows? Fix my car?" There's something you can do, but that hasn't occurred to them. You have to give people what they want, the goods or the services, and you have to be willing to go anywhere, even though a fortune might be in East Hungary or in a dry farm in West Africa. It's easier to be really who you are, just like it's easier to remember the truth. If you tell lies, you have to, "Oh, what did I say last Thursday?" If you're really yourself, as I am now, myself now, it's like taking off the brakes. So I'll finish by saying what Tito said to all of his underlings: go, do.